Okay, good morning everybody and welcome back. Today we are conducting the BDO Human Capital webinar on business setup through the HR lens. And you're joined today by myself, Janine Waters. I head up our people advisory team here at BDO. Marianne Carter and Callie Mitchell. So we'll take you through, I'll take you through us in a minute, but I wanted to start with a few housekeeping points. Just so you know, during the webinar, you can access the presentation slide in the handouts pane that you can see there in the example to the right. Any questions that you submit will be responded to via email after the session concludes, or you're also very welcome to just contact us directly after the webinar. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, just follow that link there to our BDO website. After the webinar, you're going to be sent an email that will contain the presentation slides from our session today, a link to the recorded session, so if you're having trouble sleeping tonight, you can listen to us again or share it with your colleagues. Access to our past and future webinars and our contact details, so you're very welcome to contact us directly after today. So, as I said, today you're actually with Callie Mitchell. Callie is our consultant in our people advisory session, and she heads up our virtual HR space. Marianne Carter is with us here. She's a senior manager in our people advisory team, and I'm Janine Waters. I'm our partner heading up our people advisory here in Sydney. As a team, we all have probably between us about 50 years experience in HR, which is a little bit daunting to think about. We don't look that old. And each of us have worked in in-house roles in organisations, as well as now being consultants for 2 or 3 years, depending on who you're talking to. So we have a wealth of experience around the day-to-day management of HR operations, and we've worked with organisations literally at every size, from small organisations with a couple of people right up to multinational organisations with thousands upon thousands of employees. So today, hopefully, we'll share some insights with you on what you need to think about when you're setting up a business from a HR perspective. And I'm going to hand over to Callie, who's going to lead our discussion. But you'll find that we're all fairly relaxed here and we all chip in along the way. So it'll be a fairly relaxed discussion. Callie.
Thank you, Janine. So, business setup, the HR lens, what does that actually look like? So we're going to cover off a number of different areas, and maybe some of those areas are things that you hadn't actually even considered. We'll go through some of those Australian legal requirements, and we'll also look at employment policies. We'll look at the first days within your organisation and actually how you bring your team together. And then, of course, if you've got any questions, you need any help, you need any assistance, we can actually provide those answers for you at a later stage. So firstly, let's build your team. So first of all, it can be challenging and overwhelming of everything you need to consider. So you really need to look at your business strategy and what actually that's going to look like. Basically, your business strategy is really setting up your expectations and being clear on what you actually want to get and how you're actually going to get your team to get there. And part of that is obviously bringing that team on board. So Steve Jobs here has written, great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. So it's really important as you start your business to remember that you don't have to do it alone. You want to bring in a team that's actually going to help you meet your business objectives that you actually want to get to.
I really love what you say there, Callie, and I think there's a couple of really key points I'd probably highlight. I love how you talked about it's really important to understand where you're heading and getting that direction right, which I think when you're in a business and you're just starting up, it can be sometimes a little bit daunting to think about what does that strategy look like. So I like to think of it really simply of what's the end goal I've got, and what's my approach I'm going to take to get there. And if you can kind of unpack it that way, it becomes a lot less stressful to try and think about this overarching strategy. And just think of it as the approach I'm going to take, and then you can start to think about who are the people that are going to help me get there.
Absolutely. It's just those simple steps on how you're actually going to get there. So let's look at building your team and what you actually need to think and what you actually need to consider. So first of all, you probably need to think about a new set of skills. So really think about the team that you actually have. Think about the skills that you actually have and the skills that you actually that are different from yours that you're going to need to bring in to actually build that team and make you actually work as one. So really think about
those complementary skills.
Yeah, those complementary skills, how they're actually all going to work together and how you're actually going to achieve it.
I think a good point to think about here is around the levels. You know, Marianne and I, when we were talking about this earlier, talked about sometimes you might have a bias towards a certain level of employee, for example. You know, Marianne's got a strong bias. She's always talking to me about bring young talent engineering, bring us new graduates. I have a bias, having set up this team myself, and going, I just want people that I can pass work off to, that I don't need to supervise too much. So sometimes thinking around exactly where do you want to pitch it,
Absolutely.
What's going to be important to you. And I talk to new business owners all the time who are sitting there grappling with what's that right level of skill set now to help me on the next stage of my journey. So thinking around what the skill sets are and what level they need to be at.
Absolutely.
Is really important.
Yeah, and what I love about what you guys are talking about now is that most multinationals talk about diversity. We're going to be approaching our diversity of thinking, our diversity of working. But here, as a business owner or you're setting up a business, you've actually got the perfect opportunity to bring in difference. As long as you are acutely aware of what you bring, you can bring complementary skills in, and you started on that journey already.
Absolutely. So think about those gaps. Think about your own skills, and then think about those gaps that you're actually missing so that you can actually complete that puzzle and that you've got one whole picture left.
Love it.
Okay, so then when you think about all those new set of skills, then you want to really be sure that you're confident in their ability. As you're a new company and you're starting up fresh, you want people that can take an idea and run with it. Some obviously areas are going to have to be teamworked or workshopped and ideas thought out, but you do want to have some confidence in their ability to be able to achieve the results that you want.
And how do you assess that, Kelly? Like seriously, when you're sitting there and you've got a slew of people that you're interviewing, how do you assess that ability?
Absolutely. So it's all about their recruitment. So when you're interviewing them and you're sitting with them, you want to think about examples of actually what they've done in their past. Get them to talk through those examples. What did they achieve? What was the overall outcome? Who did they work with? What was the results? What was some feedback that their colleagues would have said about them? That way that you can get a really good idea and a really good picture about what those, what their ability is like. What are those capabilities actually like? It sort of sets the tone of what they actually learned or what they actually did in their past life or in their past experiences for you to actually really see what they're going to be like when they're working with you. Think about more broadly when you're interviewing them, what are they actually saying to you? Actively listen to what they're saying. And don't be afraid to ask more questions about that and ask further information to understand that picture more in depth, so that you can really get to know them and really understand their experiences. Because also too is you want to make sure that they're a team player. And the same way you're going to be doing that is also understanding situations that they've been in before about how they've been a really successful team player. You don't want necessarily someone who says that, yeah, I'm a team player, but then comes on board and leaves, it holds everything then to themselves. They don't share anything. They're not able to help things with others. They're not able to share ideas. They're not able to be flexible in their working arrangements. Whatever it might actually look like that you're looking for within that team, really assess and look at those previous examples, because that will really get a nice picture for you to be able to assess and what they're going to be like in your company.
And I will say we could run a whole 3-day training program on how to recruit effectively. So this is just some tips and tricks. But definitely surround yourself by people who've got the experience, or call up any one of us, and we'd be more than happy to give you some guidance on how to do that selection process.
And just on the tips and tricks, things that I've picked up is when people say, I would do this.
Yes.
Chances are they probably have not. You want to look for past tense language where they've actually demonstrated it.
Yeah.
I did do this, or we spoke about that. So when they're using the we, you want to understand, okay, when you say we, who was in that? What role did you play? And as you begin to understand, as Callie says, you not only understand what they do, but you will be able to understand how they operate.
Yeah.
And then you can begin to go, right, if that's how they operate, what's the impact they're going to have in the company that I'm in now?
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Thank you. So the very last part of that, so you've looked at all their capabilities, you're all ready for them to come on board. There's one last piece of that puzzle, and there's all about those reference checks. So doing your due diligence. I can't stress how important this area is. Many organisations this day don't do them properly, and they actually get stuck later on down the track. So make sure you're completing all your cross checks. You don't want to be getting it wrong.
And can I just add something here, Callie? Because what I find is when I talk to managers, often by the time they do the reference checks, they're bought into this person. So I find it really interesting when they're listening to the reference checks, they're only listening to the information that reinforces their view that this person's the right person. And I've had it before where I've sat and I've heard very different things, and I sit up with the manager afterwards, we try to unpack that, and you realise that they've glossed over some really key flags that often the referee might be trying to give you a bit of a clue
in the nicest possible way.
They're not usually going to bag a person out and say don't hire them. Let's face it, if they were going to do that person never would have given you their number in the first place. But there will be times that they use language where you can clearly see that there's a flag, and I'll often see managers gloss that over because they don't want to hear it.
Yep.
So it's important. And there are companies that will do background checks, etc., for you if they're really critical roles, and that's good to
Absolutely.
as well.
Callie, when people are doing reference checks, is it okay, like is there a proper questions you're supposed to ask, or can you really ask what you want in there?
I think as long as your questions are not questions that would be considered illegal, so you can't ask any questions that would form the basis of you discriminating against a person. You're not going to ask their religion, for example. You're not going to ask things that could bias your decision from a legal perspective. But when it comes to their work, I don't think there are any hard and fast rules around what you can and can't ask. Do you have a view, Marianne, where you've seen some really effective questions or things that you wouldn't ask?
Yeah, I think when I have recruited in the past and when I've worked with managers that recruit, when they really look at and question what they're not sure of, that's where the gold is.
Agreed.
But when they're worried about what they can and can't ask, it ends up just being a really quick.
And it's not as effective as what it could be.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would agree with you. If you're going through a proper selection process and you're getting clear on, here's the things I'm uncomfortable with, just targeting that in your reference check can be really powerful.
Yeah,
and think about the questions up front. If you're nervous, think about the questions up front, get advice to say,
that's a great idea.
Can I ask these questions?
Yeah.
And then you can make sure you get the most powerful result from the reference check.
That's great, actually.
And to that point is coming back to those with your whole recruitment is active listening. So really making sure you're listening to those key points that those reference checks are providing, so you get the answers that you actually need to get.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, we're going to look at workplace culture, and you probably think to me, thinking, what's this important? Why? What does this matter? We're only just starting. But workplace culture is actually really important to the success and overall health of your company, your people and your customers. So it's helpful to spend some time considering why your company's culture is important and whether it has the components to allow it to grow and flourish. Basically, you want to sort of start how you want to finish. So the first step is understanding what your culture currently is, what is working and what isn't. So really sort of understanding about, you know, who you are, what are your own expectations, what are your people's expectations, and what's basically your business's expectations. What you do and don't do, and what you allow and what you don't allow, is beginning to shape the culture of your organisation. So this is all going to set those tones, and things like the policies, your employment contracts, which we'll get to, is all part of that workplace culture, as well as, you know, making sure you bring on.
Sorry, just a slight technical issue there as our system decides to reboot.
Bringing on into your organisation. So you really need to consider everything about your culture from the very first day. So let's also look at, why does culture actually matter? So it's also about getting your assumptions and your behaviours. So the assumptions and beliefs your employees drive their behaviour. It's the collective behaviour of those employees which will then determine the results. The results measure performance and indicate if your business objectives have been achieved, which is why culture is so important in getting that actually right. So we've just moved on slide, and I'll just click
And I
over
think
for you.
I really love what you're saying here, Callie, because we do a lot of work around culture in organisations, and what we find is, you know, often you're working in a monolithic organisation and trying to get cultural change is really tough.
Absolutely.
But when you're starting out, this is actually the point in which you can make that dream culture come true. If I think about how we operate now, and our core people advisory team, what I'm most passionate about is the fact that we've created a culture of success for us that is really meaningful, and the way we operate on a daily basis and all of those things that you referred to are driving that culture as we grow bigger. So it's great that we've set it up as a small team, because as every new person comes on board, everything we do supports the continual growth of that culture.
Yeah.
We do have a webinar that we ran last year on culture, and it was around innovation. So I don't remember the exact title, but if you go onto our video website, you'll be able to see that if culture is really important to you and something that you want to think about up front.
You know, Kelly, I love that you started with culture, because quite frankly, when you're setting up a business, I don't think you really think about that.
No,
to begin with.
You're in the thick of it, and
You're
you're
just
just trying to make
let's
things
just
happen.
set it up. Yeah, exactly. And even in some of the points you were saying, it's what you do and what you don't do. So even if you think you're ignoring it, you're not.
No.
You're actually
creating
forming it. Yeah, you're forming that tone already.
Yeah, absolutely. And because the fact is, whether you focus on it or not, your organisation is going to have one.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So it's just really about how to help you achieve your goals as a business, attract and retain the right talent, so they're your people, and build your external brand and reputation. So it's all going to come down to that culture. So it's really important you actually get that right.
I love it.
Right, what's next? So we've talked about, you've got your team, talked about the culture. Let's have a look at some of those sort of nitty-gritty areas that you need to sort of think about from a HR perspective. So we're going to look at the legal requirements. We're going to look at the national employment standards, basically what that is. We're going to look at the awards and what they include. We're going to define what's an award free, and we're also going to look at employment contracts, and that will help you sort of understand what you need to do now that you've got your team on board. So firstly, the Australian legal requirements. So we're going to look at the national employment standards. What are they and what do they include? So the national employment standards, or known as the NES, are 10 minimum employment entitlements that have to be provided to all employees. So regardless if they're on an award, employee contracts, an enterprise agreement, or an other registered agreement, these national employment standards, which there's 10 of, can't provide for conditions that are less than those national minimum amounts. So everything that you actually do needs to be referred to those minimum employment entitlements or be above.
But Kelly, what if people only have one employee?
Each and every employee, regardless if you have one or you have millions, they all need to still be covered under those national employment standards. So let's quickly talk about what those national employment standards are. So the national employment standards are broken down into 10 different areas. First of all, you've got your maximum weekly hours. So this is the total amount of weekly hours that your employee can do on a weekly basis, and that's actually 38 hours. Not 40, not 45, not 50, but 38 hours per week.
I should clarify here as well, because this often disturbs our overseas subsidiary owners greatly. This is the maximum weekly hours that you can have an employment contract, which doesn't mean that a person can't work overtime. Is that right?
No, that's right. They can work overtime, but generally they shouldn't be working more than 38 hours per week, averaged out over 6 months of the year.
Yeah. And the contract cannot have a requirement for more than 38 hours.
That's right. Yes. The second part of that is the right to request flexible working arrangements. This is something sort of relatively new to Australian employment standards, and companies actually understanding what flexible working arrangements. And it's not to get confused with just employees that are coming new into your organisation. The national employment standards only talk about employees that have actually been with the company for a minimum of 12 months, and they're a right to request flexible working arrangements for carers. Right. So there's some pretty defined information around those right to request flexible working arrangements, which we won't go into all the detail about that today. But if you go onto the Fair Work site, you can actually click on the National Employment Standards and have a look at that, and that will break it out very clearly of who it's actually entitled to and who's not entitled to make that right to request.
I think it's a really good point to say that the Fair Work website is actually pretty well done.
Like,
Yeah,
there's
definitely.
a lot of information there, and if you're just trying to sort of navigate through this as you're setting up an organisation, whilst we're always available and more than happy to help you work through it, the actual Fair Work website and their hotline is very helpful. Do be aware though, when you Google the Fair Work hotline, there's a company one that comes up first. The government one comes up second, just so you know.
They obviously have
So you don't have to pay
money. So just moving on, so the next one is the parental leave, the annual leave, the personal carers and compassionate leave. They're all again, the national employment standards of what the minimum amounts are for those leave. There's
So
also,
Kelly,
sorry.
what if I'm under an award and the award is less than this employment standard? Which one do I go by?
Well, the award won't be less than the national employment standards. The award and the national employment standards will be a minimum amount. They may be higher, but they won't be less than what the national employment standards. The national standards sets the benchmark, and everything else needs to be above that.
And to answer your question though, if your award for some reason has more, then you would apply the award.
So I go with the most generous.
You go with the most generous.
Okay.
There's a next national employment standard, the community service leave. Now, a lot of employees actually don't sort of consider this to be actually an important part, but this is the leave that you have to give to your employees for things like joining the Rural Fire Brigade, going and giving blood, those sorts of things with a community service leave and what those entitlements are.
And as a person who lives in the bush, I can say I think that's incredibly important.
Me too. The next one's the long service leave. Now, you're going to have to remember that the long service entitlements or legislation is different for every single state that you actually live in. So you may have employees that are here in New South Wales, you may have employees that are in Victoria, Queensland, Western Australia, etc. Now, the National Employment Standards will have the minimum, and then it will also have the guide to each of those legislations to define what those long service leave entitlements are for your individuals. But again, it needs to reach those minimum amounts, as well as the public holidays. So public holidays, again, are different for every state. Victoria seems to have a lot more public holidays than what New South Wales does. So you do also need to consider what those public holidays are for your individuals that are actually working with you. The next one is a notice of termination redundancy pay. Now, this may not be all that relevant as you're starting up your business, but you do need to sort of consider what's that termination that you actually want to have within your contracts. The National Employment Standards are defined dependent on how many actual years the employees have actually been with the company, but you might want to have something that's above that, but just make sure that you reach those minimum amounts, and then you can obviously go above that. A notice of termination, that goes both ways. So that's when an employee obviously resigns from your company, how much notice that they need to give. Also needs to be reflective of how much notice you will give to that employee should you want to actually terminate his or her employment. And of course, redundancy. Again, redundancy you may not be considering is relevant for you at this time as you start up your business, but it's certainly something you probably just need to have in the back of your mind in consideration. And the very last part is the Fair Work Information Statement. So the Fair Work Information Statement actually just defines what all those 10 national employment standards are and some general information about fair work in Australia. And that sheet actually needs to be given to every single employee actually when they start with the company, and every so often it's a really good point to actually give to them on a second basis to make sure that they actually understand it, they're aware of what the national employment standards are, and they're aware that their employment contracts basically don't actually have anything that's less than those employment standards.
So Kelly, if I'm setting up and I'm hiring someone, are you saying that I have to give them that particular statement?
Yes, and you do, and you can find that PDF statement on the Fair Work site. You just literally print it out and hand it to them, or of course you can actually email it to them as well.
It's also recommended that you get them to sign an acknowledgement that they've received it and read it.
But Kelly, what if I have an employment contract? Do I still need to give them that?
Yes.
Yes, I still do. So
yes.
No matter what?
No matter what, it's good practice just to give them the Fair Work Information Statement, because it's going to make sure that whatever is included in that information statement based on those national employment standards and your contract are aligned, or anything in your employment contract is actually higher or greater than what's in the National Employment Standards. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to look at awards. So what are awards? What do awards cover? Award and agreement free. And then lastly, the employment contracts as this legal requirements as such. So what are awards? Awards are legal documents that outline those minimum pay rates and conditions of employment. So there's over 100 industry or occupation awards that cover most people who actually work in Australia. So you will find mostly that your employees will fall under one of these 100 awards. The best way to actually go and actually find out who falls under which award is actually, again, to go onto the Fair Work site, and you can actually enter the information in step by step by step, and it will give you some examples of the awards that employee will actually fall under. Again, to Janine's earlier point, that Fair Work site is actually really helpful. It's really clear. The information is in sort of plain English. It's not gobbledygook. Anybody sort of can actually understand the information that's actually in there.
So can I just ask, Callie, I think a lot of employees in Australia, especially when we're on, salaried conditions and we've got a fairly good salary, you might assume that you're not actually under an award.
No.
So
yeah,
are most people covered by an award in Australia?
Most people actually are. So contrary to what they actually think, most people actually are covered underneath some kind of award. And it might not just be the pay that sort of is covering them as such, or the industry or the type of the role. It might be a little bit more broader than that. So, and where it becomes really important are some of those decisions around, for example, redundancies, flexible working arrangements, all of those sorts of things. You need to really consider and make sure that they've covered off those minimum amounts within those awards. So people could either be in a sort of quite a varied role, but as long as they're sort of meeting at least 50% of what that actually award classification actually has, then that award will actually cover them.
I think a good example, I used to work in the medical devices industry, and you kind of assume that they're paid fairly well as salaried reps with huge incentives, etc. And I know that employees there would have been covered by the Commercial Travellers Award, which you wouldn't instinctively go, that's the right award, but most sales reps would be covered by a Commercial Travellers Award. And what's interesting when you go onto that is, for the most part, it's irrelevant because we paid so far above it, it becomes silly to even refer back to it, except, for example, when you're going through a redundancy process, there's actually required steps that you must take for people who are under that award, which includes a consultation period and those sorts of things. That I think that can be sometimes where you get tripped up, where you think, oh, well, we pay really well, so therefore we don't have to worry about the award. But there are some other components of the award that are relevant, and that even if you pay above, those components are still valid.
Absolutely. And just onto the slide there, who do awards cover? If you see the coverage clause in each award, which is usually clause 4 of each award, and the job classification, that will be pretty clear on actually who's covered underneath that award. Again, if you need any help or assistance, you can look at the Fair Work website. Also, you can call Fair Work directly, and they're really helpful in actually trying to navigate that information. But of course, we're also here to actually help you, and you're more than welcome to call us, and we can do that for you as well.
I will say I've had some really curly ones that I've called them up, and they come back 24 hours later and go, right, this is the decision that we've made. So it's really helpful to know, and I would always say don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call them, because they're actually very supportive.
They are very supportive and they're very proactive. Absolutely. So, and they're also too, with what I liked on the Fair Work site too, it actually sort of states, if you've done something wrong or you've made a mistake, that's okay, people do. These are the steps on how to actually fix it. So it's also really important not to be scared of it as such and just go, oh, we've always done this in the past, so let's just try and sweep it underneath the carpet. Not so. They will actually help you through the process on how to actually rectify any problems that you actually have. So awards free, so we've sort of talked about this a little bit. So when an employee is not covered by an award or an agreement, they are considered to be award and agreement free. So there are those 100 different awards, but you will find that different people have different roles, different responsibilities, different pay, different conditions. They would be considered an awards free employee, But again, those national employment standards, those NES, the 10 minimum points, still must cover for every employee.
Beautiful.
Okay, so let's look at employment contracts. So we've got our awards. We probably sort of start thinking, you know, what do I need to do? How do I go about writing an employment contract? There's lots of different templates available for you and lots of different options. The first thing, obviously, you want to make sure though is legally bound. So you do need to make sure that it's actually a legally bound document. There's lots of terminology that goes into an employment contract, and I guess this is where we from BDO can actually come in and actually help you actually write your employment contracts on behalf of your employees for you.
Callie, why would I need an employment contract? So if I've got those 10 minimum requirements and I found what award my employee sits under, what's the point of an employment
Absolutely.
contract?
So the terms and conditions of the employment are basically can be changed and updated. So the employment contract will actually outline what those national employment standards are and what you're going to apply to that individual employee. And then it will be anything that's above and beyond that. So things like parental leave, you might have in there, you might have leave in regards to when they take their leave or don't take their leave. We'll have things like privacy in there. You'll have things like workplace surveillance in there. You might also have things like post-employment restraints as well. So it's basically those key things that you are above and beyond what's included within your award. And it's going to set that agreement between you and the individual to make it personalised between you as the employer and that person as the employee within the company.
I think it's really important as well, you know, in my experience from a HR perspective, good contracts make good relationships, and getting that clarification up front around this is how we work together, this is what I give to you, this is what I expect from you, rather than relying on all of this information that's in the ether on websites, etc. It puts it all in one place and makes sure that we've got clarity going into this relationship, how we're going to work together.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite a powerful tool.
Yeah.
And one that I would always recommend you put in place.
Definitely, and it also allows you for, you know, to have that employee sort of answer some initial questions, you know, clearly what is their total salary going to be, who are they going to be reporting to, when are they actually going to start, what's their commencement date, what their job title are. Sometimes employment contracts actually has, you know, their job description in there as well. You know, when's their salary going to be reviewed and on what date? When is their pay going to be paid? All of those little sort of bits and pieces of information that you may actually have provided to your employee verbally, but they've forgotten because they've gone, oh wow, I've just got the job and everything you've said now I've forgotten about. It will be plain and simple there in your employment contract. It's almost like a little letter, you know, welcoming them into the company.
It's actually a really good point. I remember we had an issue recently with one of our clients where when you're talking about how often we're paying, they had a history of paying on a monthly basis, but in actual fact, when we went and read through the detailed award that applied to them, there was a requirement that they pay fortnightly. So it's really interesting. There's some making sure that you draw those connections from the award and then back to the business practices that you have and make sure there's alignment there is a critical
Definitely
step.
And you don't want to be just giving an employee the award. The awards can be hundreds of pages long, and they're very legally bound, which again, so if you need help with them, to contact us. But your employment contracts, even though they are legally blinded, they do have lots of legal terminology in them, but they're still generally plain and simple for an employee to actually understand. So again, it's almost summarising those key points out of the award plus those additional amounts as well.
Sure.
Okay, so let's look at policies. So you've got your team on board. Now you're thinking policies. What do I need policies for? So policies are actually really important, again, back to that culture piece, to set the tone for your organisation. And there's a number of different policies that will actually be required from you as a business owner or as a startup company. But we're just going to basically look at the key HR ones and two other ones that are actually not HR related as such. So we're going to just quickly talk about those key policies that you actually want to have. So you want to have.
Can I just pause for a second here, Callie, and just take that step back again to talk about, you know, the importance of why we go through and have these policies. Because again, a lot of this stuff is, we know, for example, that there's discrimination laws. So why do we need to have a policy around discrimination rather than just relying on the legislation and the Act.
And a little bit like the awards versus the employment contract, the policy is going to sort of summarise that Act and make it specific for your organisation. So the Act will actually sort of say one thing, but the policy will actually be, how is that actually going to make it work in your organisation? What is that actually going to look like? For example, the leave policy, the leave says that you have to have 20 days, but you actually, in your policy, want to actually tell your employees actually when they actually take those annual leave days and when they can and cannot take it if there's a business closure and that sort of thing. So you want to make sure that your policies are basically a summary of the Act, and it also wants to sort of minimise any possible legal risk that you have down the place.
So there's that duty of care component, I think, that comes through really, really clearly in what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
That you as a company have a duty of care to your employees, and that's all about making sure that the workplace is safe, that everybody understands their responsibilities as employees and managers, and that you know what you're going to do if people don't comply with the law, and how you're going to respond to that.
Yeah, because it's important to note that policies can't be backdated, so that you need to have your policies. If you've got employees working with you from the 1st of February, the policies need to reflect the 1st of February. There's no point actually issuing a policy and going, oh yeah, by the way, 6 weeks ago, we implemented this policy, but we'll just put the 1st of February on it. It needs to actually be reflective of the actual commencement. So it's important to actually have that from the first day. And
I think so, what you're implying there is that it's all well and good to say, no, we'll wait until we've got an issue.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is, once you've got an issue, it's too late.
It's too late.
You don't have a policy to help support whatever decision that you're making and how you're responding to that within the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to your first point around culture, businesses that set up these policies up front send a really clear message about what's acceptable in this workplace and what is not. And Janine, you and I have had discussions before around what's happened when they haven't had a policy in place and how difficult it is for them to unravel from it.
It was interesting. I remember having one last year that was around an incentive scheme, and we talked to this company about, let's set up the core policies, and everybody's like, oh, we just want to get on with it. We just want to hire our people, and we'll deal with that stuff later. And what was interesting was they put an incentive clause in their contract, which was very light on. Just there is an incentive scheme, and you'll get 10% or whatever on good performance. And then the person exited, so they called me up and said, right, so what are we going to do? They're exiting. How do we deal with this from an incentive scheme? And my response was, well, what's your policy? Oh, we don't have one. Okay, well, if you had a policy, it would say what happens if you exit the organisation. Do you have to be employed on a certain date to be eligible? If you exit, can we withhold incentives until you've delivered on your whatever clear objectives we had when you exit? Whatever it looks like, it almost doesn't matter. But the point is that it's there and it's clear, and you're not trying to unravel that discussion at a point in time where
emotions are high.
Emotions are really high, and you've got a person who's already decided to go, and it's really hard to have a productive discussion at that point and make the right decision. So
I love what you've done here, Kelly. You've basically said if you're going to invest anywhere on policies, these are the ones you would recommend people invest in.
Absolutely.
To help them navigate all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And some of them are, so those workplace bullying and workplace health and safety, they're really key because you as an employee could be held liable should there be an issue actually in your workplace. The other thing to note about these policies too is you need to actually communicate these policies. Yes. There's no point just writing it, putting it in a little file and no one ever seeing it ever again. The employees need to actually have it, they need to read it, they need to comply with it, and they need to actually basically sign off on it saying that they have actually read and they understood the information that's included within those policies. So it's really important that you actually share those through either like an employee handbook, and again we can more than happy to help you actually create an employee handbook that includes these policies. But as the company actually grows and people that have been there for a number of years, to actually refresh them with these policies as well so that they're aware of their obligations as an employee and that you're also covered off your obligations as the employer as well. Just to sort of note as well, those two policies on the screen there in red, the privacy and workplace surveillance, aren't your typical HR policies as such, but I do make note of them because they are actually really important in today's society from a Privacy Act perspective, as well as a workplace surveillance. So workplace surveillance is all about, you know, not tracking your employees on their phones unless obviously you've got a policy that says that they can do that and they're actually informed of that on a daily basis, or making sure that if you've got cameras in the workplace, what that actually looks like and that there's appropriate signage and appropriate information. So I won't go into the detail around those, but I do want to point out that it is actually really important to not only consider those other 7 HR policies, but also look at your privacy and workplace surveillance policies as well.
And I think what you're saying here as well is these are the core ones that are going to be consistent across every organisation. There will be other things that are relevant to you in your company. So like I talked about, you know, an incentive policy,
yes,
or there'll be other things that are important to you as you're setting up your culture and deciding what's important. But these are the ones that we always say are the core, get them done early, and then invest in building and thinking about your other ones as you build your business.
Kelly, you can help with these, can't you?
Absolutely, I can.
I'm thinking of some of our clients, and I know, just to look at those policies and go, where do I even start?
And
That's
again,
just horrific.
Like your employment contracts, we are more than happy to sit down with you and actually help you actually navigate through and write these policies for you so that they're ready to go. As soon as that employee has their employment contract, they've also got the full list of policies as well.
Yeah.
And we can tidy it up and make it all pretty into an employee handbook for you as well.
Nice. Kelly's the queen of employee handbook.
Okay, so we've looked at quite a bit today. We've looked at those legal requirements. We've looked at the culture, we've looked at getting your team organised, so everybody's good to go, and it's those first days of employment. And so this is also too where I guess some companies fall down, and some of the larger companies, not just small businesses, actually fall down because they don't get their onboarding right for their employees. Onboarding your employee is just as important, I should say, as getting your recruitment right. There's no point spending all that time, spending all that energy, spending all that effort to get the most amazing employee and then actually not onboard them right. So what does that actually mean by not onboarding them right? So it's really important to consider what those first days of the employees will look like. So you need to think about things like, well, what are their objectives? What are your expectations of them? And what are their expectations of you, especially as you're a small business trying to grow here and everything might be a little bit crazy within those sort of first few weeks. You need to sort of understand how will you help them be successful and how will they help you be successful. Remember, the key point earlier was all about that culture and all about that team player. So you really need to think about what is it that they're going to bring in to actually help you be successful, and how will they be successful as well. So thinking through that, mapping that out with them within those first days of employment. Also too, you know, it's also really helpful to how you're going to bring that team together. You want them to work as a team, but sometimes you might need to consider like, well, I'm going to actually have to bring that team together, and what sort of team building exercises do you actually want to consider? Of course, you've looked at the culture and start the way you actually want to finish, and really think about that investment that you've actually already had. So to set up these employees, it's a massive investment in your company. You just want to make sure that those sort of first couple of weeks, first month, first 3 months in that first year is really defined and really clear on what those objectives and what those areas are that you actually want them to look like.
I think it's really interesting you talk about, you know, large organisations, you know, just as likely to get this wrong. And I would say, in fact, they're even more likely to get this wrong because the bigger the organisation, sometimes the harder it is to create this experience. So when you're a smaller organisation, if you can start thinking about this, you know, we've all been new employees, so we know what it's like on that first day. If you can put yourself back in those shoes, that can really help you think about what that experience is that you want to create. Also thinking about, just as much as you have made an investment in this employee, they have actually made an investment in you. If they've left a job to come to join you, then that's a huge impact for them. And you're sitting there, you know, in your first few days as a new employee, and you're assessing that decision that you made, just as much as you as a manager assessing that employee. They're coming in going, wow, it's disorganised. Wow, they don't have a computer for me. Wow, they don't seem to have any idea what they want me to do. All of those things can create that that stumble effect
Absolutely.
where it makes it that much harder to then start to get that relationship working effectively. So putting some really good thought into that up front is critical. We spend a lot of time thinking about effective onboarding.
Yes.
And I think we should, if we haven't got it on our list, I think we should add it to our webinars for next year, because it's one of the most powerful things.
Absolutely.
Whether you do it right or wrong,
Yeah.
it's hugely impactful
Yeah.
either way.
And it should be something that, to Janine's point, something that you think about before those first days. So not as they're there thinking manly, all right, you're here, what am I going to do with you? All of this should be a proactive onboarding step. Like as you would go through a particular process within your recruitment, you should be going through a particular process with your onboarding as well prior to them actually starting, not just actually sort of trying to make it work on in those first days.
It's not the thing you want to wing.
Definitely not the thing that you want to wing. So that's it. That sums up our studying up a company through a HR lens. So thank you for your time. We hope you've learned something today. Certainly if you need more information or you want to contact us directly, we'll be more than happy to do so for you. Over to you, Janine.
Thank you so much, Callie, and thanks for taking us through today's session. I seemingly cannot actually. I'll get you to move the slides. I think I've just reiterate at the end of this, as I said to you earlier, Callie actually runs our virtual HR experience, and she spends a lot of time working with organisations, whether they're large overseas organisations that are setting up a new subsidiary in Australia, or other organisations that have started to grow and are getting to the point where they're bringing in more staff, and they get to that tipping point where they all of a sudden realise that they don't have the structures in place to support them. Callie is amazing at helping bring managers through this experience.
Definitely.
And loves doing it, I will say. Marianne and I are also always happy to help and provide any of our expertise as you get to some trickier situations that can happen too when you grow and all of a sudden realise that you need to restructure or bring in different talent and those sorts of things. So more than happy to talk to you at any point. I've also just got up here our upcoming webinars. So you can see we did a Learning Agility webinar last month, which for those of you who are recruiting new talent, I definitely recommend you go and listen to that, because it's all about thinking around those people that are going to progress really quickly in an organisation and how to harness their capabilities. And our next webinar is going to be all around successful succession planning. So if you're thinking about, one of those key questions that I always have as a leader is, if I fell off my perch tomorrow, who would take over? We'll talk about that when we go through successful succession planning. And that's a bit of a mouthful.
That is a mouthful.
We might need to change the title so I don't list my way through it. I will also say, all of us are very experienced from a HR perspective. We are not lawyers, so we do actually engage with appropriate experts when it comes to building our templates, etc. So any advice that we've given today, please don't consider it to be legal advice. It is, however, very practical, experienced HR advice, and I hope that it's added value for you today. And we hope to come across you even in another one of our webinars in the future, or give us a buzz or send us an email if we can help you in any way. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.